Hello everyone, welcome back to Power Arc. Today we're going to be doing some lore reactions. Going to be reacting to some Dungeons and Dragon lores. Now, I am a very big Dungeons and Dragons fan. I play a lot of D&D. Um, his entire thing is full of dice. Um, I have a dragon back here. You might have seen in some of the videos. The thing that is capturing this is my dice roller. Yeah. Um, I have a, I play a lot of D&D. I've dungeon mastered a lot of games. Um, but I've never played. I've always done homebrew. Never played a actual campaign setting by Wizards of the Coast. So I feel like if I was to do one, it would be on the Forgotten Realms, probably more than likely. So I want to be going to through the entire lore history, the timeline of the Forgotten Realms. Um, and if after I get through this, I may go through other campaign settings because there's other campaign settings I don't want to go through, like Planescape campaign setting, um, Dark Suns campaign setting seems interesting. There's others I want to go through. Then also after that, maybe look into like the history of Pathfinder. I never played Pathfinder, seen anything from Pathfinder. It seems interesting. Or Warhammer 40K. Never played it, never seen anything from it. Could be interesting. I just know that it's like it's like sci-fi D&D. Yeah. But with that, will get started. This is by MrRhexx. The original link will be in the description below if you want to go and watch his original video. With that said, let's get started.
Dungeons and Dragons and your dungeon master offers to run you through an official D&D adventure, you may want to know about the world that you will be inhabiting. It behooves you because, just like with Lord of the Rings, every time you consume that content, you will be in Middle-earth. And so, knowing about Middle-earth makes that experience a lot better. Well, the very same thing applies to Dungeons and Dragons. Now, of course, your dungeon master may choose to run through an adventure set in another different place, but chances are, if you are consuming D&D content, this is the place you want to know. If you want to play Baldur's Gate 3, if you want to watch the Dungeons & Dragons movie Honor Among Thieves, if you want to read many of the popular Dungeons & Dragons novels, if you want to purchase and play through most of the official Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, then you need to know that all of these things are set in one specific world, and that world is called the Forgotten Realms. Today, I'm going to talk about this world specifically.
Quick question to anyone that's read these. Are the Forgotten Realms like books good? It's like I know that the Dritz books are supposed to be good, and I want to get them just to read those. But I know that there's also other books set in the Forgotten Realms. I know Dragonlance has this entire book series for him. Don't know how good those series are. So if anyone could tell me in the comments below how good those series are, so I know which one to read first.
And that world is called the Forgotten Realms. Today, I'm going to talk about this world, specifically about its timeline. I'm going to cover the most important events that have shaped this land to turn it into what it is today, so that hopefully you can have a better idea as to its grand history and why things are the way they are. Specifically today, we're going to cover the beginning of this world's history, all the way until the elves took over, which is a huge chunk of time. However, before we do that, this video is brought to you by Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons & Dragons, who have asked me to let you all know how easy it is to play D&D, even if you have never done so before. In fact, it is now easier than ever. I play a lot with new players, and they're often intimidated about learning all of. Really recommend it. And thank you.
Okay.
We want to start shooting in 3 weeks, and your life rights are the last thing we need, so...
Gotta stop you right there, Bev. I think we understand the situation. Without us and our life rights, there's no film. So what we need is a number that is fair.
Oh, we don't need to do numbers. You can just have your lawyers call business affairs. It's just a 4. 4.
4. That's right. 4, 4, 4. For what? For...
war between two different groups, the gods and the primordials. Now, what exactly are gods and what are the primordials? False name is watch videos of, and yeah, it would be really helpful if you're just starting. Even if you're just playing around with the idea of D&D but haven't like fully committed yet to finding a group, do try a new resource for new players to find a way through. So play D&D. Now back to the lore.
Okay, let's go.
Now, this here is the planet that we are going to be talking about. Its name is Aber Toril. Now, the reason why the planet has 2 names will become apparent later, but for now, know that the planet is under an ice age as of the beginning of this story. Whatever happened before the Ice Age is mythical history, and it's completely up to the interpretation of gods as to what exactly transpired. Many races have, of course, their own mythological origin story for the planet, and of course, they all differ in many, many ways, but they all agree on one thing. There was a massive war between 2 different groups, the gods and the primordials. Now, what exactly are gods and what are the primordials falls outside of the scope of this video, but you can consider gods to be entities manifested by the hopes, dreams, angers, fears, and all kinds of emotions and wishes of living entities, made manifest by the same energies that created the multiverse. And then you can consider the primordials to be the raw amalgamation of the elements, creatures that have existed beyond time. What happens when you put raw elements or power together and then it grows a sentience? But regardless of whatever transpired during this ancient mythological conflict, the world was now encased in ice, and whatever existed on this planet before this ice was now dead and long forgotten. When the ice eventually receded, it revealed a single big megacontinent called Mouroboros. Over time, the first sentient species started to develop in this new continent, and those first species we call the creator races. Of these races, we have the Sorok, which are reptilian and snake-like, the Batrachi, which were amphibian, the Eri, which were avian, the Fae, which we actually don't know much about how they used to be back then, and then the humans, which were...
Okay, so... These are like the bird races, I guess? The Fae are Fae. The lizard folk and stuff come from you, I believe. What could have come from you? I do not know.
Were primitive ape-like creatures. The first species to dominate were the Soroks, which were granted tremendous knowledge and power by a mysterious deity called the World Serpent. It is said that by the time this god approached them, the Soroks were nothing more than savages in these wild, untamed lands. However, this god offered them the knowledge of magic and how to smith tools and weapons, and all it asked in return...
So the reason why they took over was because of knowledge. This god offered them knowledge, and that gave them the leeway to take over. So playing off of the fact that the person that has the knowledge, the more knowledge on the enemy, or the more knowledge on anything, is the one that will win the fight. Okay.
Turn was obedience and many, many blood sacrifices, which the MrRhexx happily obliged. Using the knowledge granted by the World Serpent, the MrRhexx conquered the world and ushered the greatest kingdom that this planet will ever see, even to this day. It is believed that their kingdom literally spanned the entire planet. Now, during the climax of their rise to power, they came up with the idea to consolidate every single bit of learned magical knowledge into one single magical item. They effectively traveled throughout the entire kingdom, which at the time was the whole planet, and grabbed every single bit of magical knowledge, every spell created, every technique for how to craft items, everything that related to magic, and recorded it into a series of magical scrolls. These scrolls would end up becoming the most powerful magical item in the history of the Forgotten Realms, and of course, not as strong as some of the artifacts that may have been created by gods and span the multiverse, but in terms of magical items like created by mortals here on this planet, these are the most powerful. We call these the Nether Scrolls. Now, what makes these scrolls so particularly powerful and effective at teaching magic is that the content of the scrolls appears before you as you attempt to read it, and the content tailors itself to you so that every time you read an individual scroll, you will always learn something new, with seemingly no limit to how much information a single scroll may contain. But then through wars, civil...
It's pretty powerful. I mean, still a similar idea to use it in the campaign. Okay.
strife and perhaps maybe even fate, the scrolls would inevitably be lost as the empire of the MrRhexx would eventually fail and its pages would find themselves scattered all across the planet, found by different societies and peoples throughout history. It is believed that the vast majority of all magic cast today in the world of the Forgotten Realms can be somehow traced back to the Nether Scrolls in one way or another. In any case, the empire of the MrRhexx collapsed in what you may call something of a crisis of faith. See, gods are made powerful by the veneration of mortals.
Okay, back to going to the Nether Scrolls thing. This gives me an idea for a campaign where the party is tracking down, like is tasked by a school of wizards to try to track down rumors of this, and the villain is also after it to try to learn a new powerful spell. It seems like it could be
and gods can be created and destroyed with enough faith or lack thereof. Because the empire of the MrRhexx was all-encompassing, the veneration of the World Serpent was mandatory within the empire. Every single species that existed at the time had to pray to this god. However, each different species had its own wants and desires, wishes, dreams, and fears. The World Serpent was forced to become this entity that was oftentimes contradictory, being a god of tyranny and enslavement for the MrRhexx, but then a god of freedom and choice for some of the disenfranchised.
Okay. That gives me Percy Jackson vibes, because it makes me think of the what are they called? It makes me think of like in the sequel series Percy Jackson, the Heroes of Olympus, where if you say one version of the god's name, like if you talk to Zeus and you say Jupiter or start talking about Jupiter, that god Zeus would turn it into Jupiter, because they're the same god with different names, different personalities, and like all the gods in all of history are the same gods. It's just that they have, depending on the culture, depends on how they present themselves. Okay.
Enslaved races. The World Serpent was then forced to sort of split into multiple personalities, multiple deities within one. Some fragments which ended up fighting against each other, which of course furthered that civil strife within the empire. This was compounded by the increasing reliance on slaves by the Empire to the point where the Yuan-Ti, which were a snake-like creation of the MrRhexx, basically manned the entire empire. They were the war masters, the diplomats, the shopkeepers, the construction workers, the servants, and the guards. Anything and everything that could be delegated to the Yuan-Ti was delegated to the Yuan-Ti, while the MrRhexx simply lived a life of hedonism until eventually the empire sort of slowly weakened and collapsed into pieces throughout the next set of 1,000 years. And as the Yuan-Ti slowly started taking over these cities as the new masters, the Batrachi started gaining more and more power and slowly became the new overlords of the world. But the power vacuum that the MrRhexx had left began emboldening many different species within the world, including the giants and the titans that existed in the north, which started a massive war against the Batrachi. Now, this war between the Batrachi and the titans was being won by the titans, and so, now forced against a wall, the Batrachi decided to up the stakes. See, deities at this point in time had been fairly present in the world. The World Serpent had granted so much power before to the MrRhexx, and the Titans at this point in time as well had their own god, Anam the All-Father, which blessed his children with might and power. And so, and the Batrachi, on the other hand, as powerful spellcasters as they were, they did not.
I want to say that the giant gods are represented by the Norse gods. I know that the gods of our world are in Dungeons and Dragons. I know that Zeus, Odin, and Thor are in Dungeons and Dragons. There's an entire realm called Hades. But aren't the Jotun gods the giant gods based on Norse myth? I want to say. I could be wrong. I am probably definitely wrong. Correct me in the comments, please.
Not have such divine support, and so they upped their ante and put their cards on the other side, so to speak. The Batrachi started developing profane rituals in order to summon and free many of the primordials, which had been imprisoned in the mythological war between the gods and the primordials. Now, exactly who was freed and how the war continued is still fairly unknown, and there's many different interpretations of how exactly things unfolded after this. Because as soon as many primordials started walking the planet, many deities suddenly got involved again and also walked the planet as well, fighting them. Then afterwards, it is believed that one particular primordial, Asgorath, a draconic entity, decided to use its unimaginable power to sling a titanic moon or asteroid right onto the planet. Whether it did this to end the war or kill some deities or to destroy the planet, it's a bit unclear, but the event is called the Tearfall. When the asteroid fell into the planet, it effectively shattered the land, creating what we now call the Sea of Fallen Stars, which nowadays rests here. Now, the resulting apocalypse that fell upon the world after the Tearfall completely destroyed the Batrachi civilization. Many of them were forced to use their powerful magics to abandon the planet and move towards other astral realities. Some others were forced to live underwater, eventually devolving into many of the amphibian monstrous races that we see today, but most of them simply died, and so the Batrachi, as we know them, basically just went extinct. Now, the Forgotten Realms has one entity which we call the Overgod. We really know nothing about this individual other than the fact that he sort of rules over all of the gods and the primordials. He's sort of above all, but he doesn't really act. He behaves as an observer, basically. At least on most occasions, he only seems to act when he's forced to, and the events that resulted in the Tearfall forced his hand. This Overgod, which we know is called Ao, decided to separate the planet into two forms. One which would be called Aber, and the other which would be called Toril. Aber was given to the primordials, while Toril was given to the gods. And so in...
Okay, that brings a question up I want to have an answer to, so give it 1 second. Is there a campaign setting in Aber?
in this form, the war between the gods and the primordials would now finally cease. Now, the Forgotten Realms focuses almost exclusively on Toril and not on Abeir, so we're not really gonna cover Abeir at all from now on. Also know that after the Tearfall, the supercontinent that was Miroboros was sort of split into now multiple continents. Further, the planet was also changed a bit when Eos separated it into two whole beings. Further, there are some events that will transpire later that will also shift it, but basically this is how the planet looks now, and roughly has maintained this shape throughout the rest of its history. Now, there are books that cover most of these locations and continents, but honestly, about 100% of the content that you will be experiencing from Dungeons & Dragons will be set in this continent, which we call Faerun. So from here on out, for the rest of the video, we will focus on this particular continent. Now, something very interesting transpired. Again, whether this was intended for Masquerath or not, it turned out that dragons started appearing in the world. Many creation myths actually state that the moon that Ascarath plummeted onto the planet was in fact filled to the brim with draconic eggs, which detached from the moon and then fell like tiny meteorites all over the planet. And so, from this moment on, dragons would start appearing and, of course, start changing the fate of the world. It would only take 1,000 years or so before all of these dragons would start becoming adult and ancient dragons, powerful enough to shatter any semblance of status quo among the currently existing civilizations. The UNT were forced to retreat into their cities, losing to the awe-inspiring might of dragons. Similarly, the Aerie would easily fall to the dragons as well, previously being able to resist domination by the other creator races thanks to their ability to fly and build kingdoms in far-fetched locations, but now they could no longer hide, as dragons could fly as well and match them very easily in the air. A draconic superiority on the mainland was undisputed, except for one species that stood above the rest. The one species that had stood against the previous master of the world, the Titans and the Giants of the North. Unlike the UNT and the Aerie, who were puny compared to the dragons, the Titans were actually a match for them, both in size and in magical might. At the time, the Titans were at their apex in their kingdom that they called Ostoria, also called the Colossal Kingdom, which did spread quite far in the world. The dragons, of course, also were expanding quite rapidly, building their own cities and kingdoms. And so the inevitable clash between the two groups, of course, would come. However, it would last for at least 4,000 to 6,000 years before it would reach its conclusion. It was a brutal and bloody conflict, the two titanic races fighting against one another. It was so bad that this hatred that they had for each other would become a generational, almost foundational principle of the two that these two species would have against the other. Even to this day, this hatred still runs in their blood. Giants hate dragons, and dragons hate them back. Now, many things happened during this time. See, during the Dragon and Giant War, the other races of the world finally got a chance to thrive unseen. Frankly, neither dragons nor the giants had any time to invest in subjugating any of the other races. They were frankly too puny and weak for them to worry about. The humans at the time were still in their infancy, not really ready to take over the world yet. Instead, the ones who would start taking advantage of the spirit of instability were the elves. See, we didn't really talk about one of the creator races. We sort of just brushed them aside, but the Fae do have a part to play in this story. See, the story goes that the Fae left the planet quite early on to go into the Feywild, this transitory adjacent realm that existed perpendicular to Toril, a planetary echo, if you will. What exactly is the Feywild, again, does fall beyond the scope of this video, but the Fae made their kingdoms on this realm that bordered the material plane. And at this moment in the history of the planet, the Fae started opening portals from the Feywild and into Toril, and through these portals came the very first elves, creatures that had grown and evolved from the Feywild, who took advantage of the portals being opened in order to explore the world beyond. And so did the first elves make it onto the planet. Now, it did take quite a while for these elves to set up and start understanding the world and their magic. Again, This war between the dragons and the giants lasted for many thousands of years, and throughout this war, the dragons would cripple and limit the ability for elves and some of the other species to be able to really expand throughout the world. Now, I don't fully have the time here to delve into every single species that existed at this moment, but do know that there were a fair amount of them by now. We're told, for example, that one of the creator races had already opened up a portal in the mountains of the north, and from that portal came the first orcs, who were savage monsters suitable for warfare. We also know that the dwarves had spawned from the cavernous bowels of the planet and lived under the ground unmolested for millennia. We also had creatures like nagas who were created by the UNT. We had halflings who always existed in the shadows of other races and never really accomplished anything grand. And of course, we have goblinoids and ogres and the like. But all in all, the dragons proved quite superior to everyone else, including the Titans. But they suffered from a massive rupture within their ranks, as unlike the unified deific pantheons of the giants, the gods of the dragons were split. This can happen when the gods that form a religious pantheon have no obvious true leader, but instead are a collection of powerful but equal gods. See, Anum, the All-Father, is the undisputed leader that governs the gods of the giants. He is the most powerful, and all of the gods under him just simply do as he says. And in turn, all titans and giants simply follow his commands. This was not true for dragons, who are by nature more individualistic. So what followed were the Holy Draco Wars, where religious factions within the Draconic Empire started forming and then, of course, fought each other. See, back then, dragons were incredibly religious. In fact, the main reason that they had even fought against the giants and the titans in the first place was because they were ushered to do so by the gods. Really, it was just a beef between the giant gods and the dragon gods that forced both groups to fight. Now, some of these religious differences were centered around what exactly was Askarath, and what exactly did Askarath want for the dragons. Other fights started because the new dragon gods were being spawned, and the younger generations of dragons were venerating them, while the older generations were sticking to the ancient gods. And then, of course, came Bahamut and Tiamat, who ended up becoming the most popular.
So the Bahamut was the metallic god dragon, and Tiamat is chromatic god dragon. Is there a Ferris god dragon? Okay, it's not giving me anything for it. If anyone knows, tell me in the comments down below which of the dragon gods do the Ferris dragons fall under?
Of the new brand of gods that were being created, deities who hated each other and spurned their children to fight one another in their name. In summary, the dragons effectively crippled the empire of the giants and the titans, pushing them all the way to the north and almost destroying them in total, while their draconic empire weakened itself thanks to infighting and in the end forming two major factions of dragons. The chromatics, which were the black, blue, white, red, and green, versus the metallics, which were the gold, silver, bronze, copper, and brass dragons. Eventually
But what about the Ferris?
They did realize that religious fervor had caused their empire to crumble, and they did abandon their gods, but by that point, the empire had grown weak enough for the elves to strike. This would be the point where elves would take on a primary role on the world, and it would all start with a massive high elven spell that they would unleash upon the dragons. Before I go about what exactly that spell did, we should probably talk about magic in this world. See, the magic of this world comes from what we call the weave. The weave is this invisible force that exists everywhere, like a fabric that touches every living being, every rock, every fiber, every tree, and every grain of sand on the planet. When you cast a spell, you're grabbing a huge chunk of this weave and then brutally shifting it into a desired shape before you release it into your desired outcome. What spells are just ways in which you grab the weave and twist it to form shapes, but it's not a perfect science. The spells are really just approximations to desired outcomes. Let's do a thought experiment. Imagine a tranquil river that passes by a field. Now imagine that you want to water a beautiful flower that is about 10 feet away from the river. Casting a magical spell would be like grabbing a big chunk of water with your fist and then walking over to the flower and dropping the water on top of it. Doing it in this way is kinda crude. It's wasteful. Much of the water would seep out from your fists as you would try and grab it, and then some of it would also fall onto the ground on your way to the flower. And then when you drop the water into the flower, it would drop in this kind of random shape and form, and it might damage the flower on the impact if you do drop too much water. However, doing it like this is fast, it's convenient, it's easy, anyone can do it. And this is how everyone has been casting magic up until now. The elves come from a different place, a place where abusing nature, abusing the world, and abusing magic is kinda frowned upon, especially so because in the Feywild, well, you could consider sometimes the land itself to be alive. But regardless, the elves were a lot more delicate with their magic. They were a lot more refined with their magic. And so, with the help of their god, Corellon Larethian, they devised a different way to cast magic. Elvish high magic. This type of magic is extremely complicated. It's basically ritual magic. It takes a very, very long time to cast, oftentimes requires multiple casters working together at the same time, and that's only after many, many years of preparation. Some Elvish high magics require centuries to learn. This is why other races never really managed to learn this type of magic. It just takes so long to learn and requires a cohesive group of casters all working together symbiotically to be able to be used. Now, let's go back to our river example. Whereas casting normal spells would be the equivalent of grabbing water from the river with your own fists, Elvish high magic would be the equivalent of, say, carefully digging a small trench that leads the water from the river directly towards the flower. You know, it takes a long time to do, requires a lot of effort, might require a lot of help, and if you don't finish it, it was all wasted. You don't accomplish anything after all if the trench doesn't actually get to the flower. But it's permanent. You don't have to water the flower anymore, it's done. Forever. Further, if someone wanted to undo this effect, it would be really hard. You would have to start filling up the trench with more dirt, but that might leave patches of magic stranded in ponds. Also, there is a chance of catastrophic consequences. The water might completely drown the flower. The locations where you dug up the trench are basically unusable now, and if you reroute the river water too much, you might dry out certain locations on the river, creating untold chaos. All in all, Elvish high magic is unbelievably potent and can accomplish things that people could only dream of, but it's very dangerous and can harm the world in a permanent way. Well, at the time...
Okay, I think I understand the difference between magic and Elven high magic now. Elven high magic is a permanent change to the landscape. It would take another permanent change to change the permanent change. So basically, they're rewriting nature.
Time, the dragons were a problem, and the elves sought a solution. The elves devised a high magic spell called the Draco Rage Mythal, and the spell was tied to a star called the King Killer Star, which is basically a comet that becomes visible on the planet rarely every once in a while. The way the spell was formulated was such that every time that this comet would be visible from the planet, its magic would activate and its magic would make all dragons go mad. Quote, after years of secret research in the frozen north of Faerun and extensive debate about the costs and risks, the elves weaved the Draco Rage Mythal, a permanent crafting of elvish high magic, and one of the most powerful spells ever woven into the weave. This epic spell made it impossible for dragonkind to continue its collective dominion over Faerun. The Draco Rage Mythal caused all dragons, including those of type dragon and creatures with the dragon blood subtype, to become reckless and run amok across their lands, slaughtering their young and vassals and destroying all in their wake. But it also gave the fair folk the opportunity to break free of dragon rule, marking the denouement of the reign of dragons. As a result of this ancient curse, dragons have periodically gone berserk, rampaging across the realms. Like some sort of disease, the so-called Draco Rage, sometimes also known as the Dragon Rage or simply the Rage, lays dormant, erupting forth every several decades or even few centuries, and even seemingly associated with the reappearance of the King Killer's star, actually a bright red comet that winks like a baleful eye, to infect dragons for several 10 days at a time. End quote. This is, in some ways, one of the cruelest curses that has ever been wrought in the history of this planet. And
that makes me feel horrible for the campaigns I had where a dragon, because I have done a campaign where the forgotten chromatic dragons were trying to rebuild their society and come back from the brink of extinction. And my players were the ones that came in and shut that down. And oh god. Ah man, that makes it feel a little worse. Oh. I didn't know. I didn't know that they have been cursed to never be able to get their society back. So that sucks. That really sucks. And I have a Dragonborn in my next campaign. I might have this. I might have this meteor come back around, just in case the party starts acting up. Okay.
And from this moment, from the moment that this Draco Rage mythal was created, dragons would never be able to construct or hold cities or have any semblance of society on this planet ever.
You're not a child, you're a man. So stop wearing so many layers to go outside and get the bearskin tactical.
No, I'll wear
Again,
as many skins
because every single time that this star would show up in the night sky, dragons would be driven onto madness, to devour their very own children, to destroy the buildings that they have constructed, the cities that they have built, and slaughter any friends that they may have within reach. This destroyed dragons as a civilization forevermore. And upon the swift and universal destruction of their civilization, the elves rose up to claim the land for themselves. This epoch in time now we call the First Flowering, which was essentially the spreading and the domination of elves across the land. Many enormous kingdoms were made by all of the very different kinds of elves that existed at this moment, from the Green Elves to the Sun Elves, the Dark Elves, and Moon Elves. And then we would have the Crown Wars, which were the resulting battles and the wars between the elves. Now, this whole period is very, very long, longer than the rest actually. To put it into perspective, our story started in minus 35,000 DR when the Ice Age ended. DR is kind of like the Jesus moment of history, where modern civilizations started using that moment in time to start counting years forward. I will explain, of course, what that moment is once we get to year 0. But basically, everything that we have talked about so far lasted about 9,000 years in total. The rise and fall of the Soraks and the subsequent rise of the Batrashi up until the moment that they summoned primordials and the Tearfall falls onto the planet. That whole section of history is called the Days of Thunder and go from minus 35,000 DR to minus 30,000 DR. Then the rise and fall of both of the Titans and the Dragons comprise what we now call the Dawn Age, which goes from minus 30,000 DR to minus 24,000 DR. And this age, the time of the elves, both the First Flowering and the Crown Wars, go all the way from minus 24,000 DR to minus 9,000 DR. So overall, the time of the elves lasts a very, very long time. And it actually lasts longer than this, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, I want to, of course, give you all as many details as I can while keeping this in a relatively watchable format. So what I'm going to do is I will separate this into multiple videos. We're going to end it here. But stay tuned for the next part where we will cover the famous Crown Wars. And you will get to see what exactly happened that made the Dark Elves be cursed into becoming the Drow. And of course, what happened after, including the rise of the humans.
Okay. Interesting. That's very informative there. Oh. I can't wait to get into the future of the Forgotten Realms, and also into the other aspects of D&D. See the other campaign settings and stuff in Dungeons and Dragons. I may have to even eventually run a campaign in the Fey runs. That's a good lore right there. I'm invested. I can't wait to get into the rise and falls of the elves and the Crown Wars. Whatever's after that. Yeah. But if there's anything you all liked about this, leave it in the comments down below. Comment down what you would like to see me react to, anything you want to see me see lore of. While you're down there, give this video a like, subscribe, you want to. And until next time, I've been John, and I'll be seeing you.